9/11, responding to a coworker's helicopter crash, and a baby in a freezer, all on this episode of the EM Unplugged podcast. Let's go get it. That's funny. All right, gentlemen, let's get to it. Mr. Allen Wolfe, thank you for joining us today, everybody out there. We're also live on TikTok, letting everybody know that we are interviewing today Mr. Allen Wolfe of LifeLink 3 and longtime friend and mentor for me. Mr. Wolfe, glad to have you on. Why don't you say hello to everybody?
What's up? Thank you so much for inviting me, Charlie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you said yes. I mean, you I'm sure you got all these offers, and you always do. So, and of course we got Mr. Greg Carr, Shade Tree Cardiology, also in the house.
Ooh, how's everybody?
All right. Well, then the thing, we have a run a show here. I want to make sure that we get Allen. Everybody knows about your background. Anybody that's going to listen to this knows who in the hell you are. They know the wolf.
Right.
We were just talking. We were just talking a minute ago about always watching, always judging with some graphic with Jesus and yourself, and I started laughing, and I don't even know who the other person was, but I'm sure it was Trump. Anyway, so everybody knows who you are, but give if there's a random person that just crawled out from under a rock.
All right. I've been a nurse. I'm a nurse. I'm not a paramedic. You know what I learned paramedicine from is great flight paramedics. You know, I can remember my first job I had at DC. The flight job, Washington, D.C. MedStar, where I flew there for 20 years. In my first years there, I can remember calling the paramedics EMTs.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
That didn't go over well, let me tell you. When I said EMT, and he's like, what? You know, because I didn't know the terminology. I was a nurse and worked in the hospital for years, and I came to fly. And when I said that, they were like pissed, you know.
Should have called him an ambulance driver. That always goes over well.
I know, dude. I know. And so I had to learn the lingo. And so I learned paramedicine from flight paramedics. I'm not registered by any means, but I just watch what they do. And learn from them what they taught me. And so when we would do scene flights, although they train me in scene stuff, I would just follow closely behind how the paramedic led. You know what I mean? I knew some stuff, obviously being a nurse, but that environment was just really different. So I've been in the industry, a nurse probably 38 years, and been in the industry probably about 34. I worked as an ICU nurse in CVICU and surgical ICU, and then I worked ER trauma in Washington, D.C. area for about 7 years before I started to fly. And so before I did that, I had a really great experience from the CVICU part because you learned advanced hemodynamics, and you can apply advanced hemodynamics to trauma, cardiac, anything you can apply that information to. That's extremely valuable. On the flip side of that, I worked like my side job. I would go work in the county's emergency room. And man, was that eye-opening to work at a place where it was during the days in DC, which they're almost back there now, of the violence of the crack wars, where people were the shootings and all that stuff. So, you know, you would see 13 shootings in an hour one day we saw there. Yeah. I think on February 14th. Actually, it was on Valentine's Day. It was in Washington Post.
Yeah, the Valentine's Day massacre, as it were.
Exactly. And that's what the Washington Post call it. Yep.
Oh,
it was
wow.
shootings. And so I learned a lot, and also learned about the disparities in healthcare during that time, where you see people come in with the things you learned in medical school and nursing school that you thought people got treated for. Like, what's the one with the moon eyes?
Hypothyroidism?
All that stuff that's really
exacerbated.
Or you would see 15-year-olds walk in with spontaneous pneumothorax, just a little short of breath. Then the next day, and one lung is like this, collapsed, and sitting there. Or you see one person that walked in with a C2 fracture and just walk in the door and say, my neck's been bothering me. And they have a big QC2 fracture that you wondered how come it didn't just snap and kill him.
Wow.
Right.
So
wow.
That was pretty amazing. So I had that kind of build up of 7 years experience before I first got my flight job at MedStar. So I was there for 20 years. and I became chief flight nurse there in 2000, right around 9/11.
Nice.
I know, perfect timing, right?
Yeah.
In that city. And then in 2010, I decided to leave there and I came over to Air Methods. And when I came over to Air Methods, I was regional director of the West Coast, mainly California and Southern Arizona. And then Air Methods bought a company called Omni, which had about 60, 70 bases around a whole lot of states. So I had 52 bases all of a sudden, and they covered everything from Idaho and Montana down to El Paso, Texas, and New Mexico, and all over Arizona, and became chaos. And so in 2012, they created a position of director of clinical education at Air Methods, but that person had to have a master's degree and had to be a clinical nurse specialist and had done it before. Well, I did that in DC.
And dude,
nice.
they find.
And look out. Guess who walked in the door?
Hot to trot, baby. Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Always
BG in the
judging, yes.
background.
And that was the start of it. That's why, all Charlie and a lot of others has been in that role as director of education. And so I lived in Denver for 8 years. So
God's country.
And yeah, exactly. And the thing about Air Methods, which is great, and I loved Air Methods, love working at Air Methods, have no complaints about it, is that the reach of influence, because it was so big. We have 1,500 employees, Charlie,
right?
And we had 160 bases. And let's think over a course of 8 to 10 years, the number of people who left and people came in. So your influence on molding practice is pretty freaking amazing,
Yeah.
And you get to meet a lot of people. To this day, now you see people, they say, "Hey, Alan," I go, "Hi," and I know who they are. But and they'll say, "Oh, I worked at Air Methods at so and so base." You go, "Oh, okay." People that you passed in your journey, but you just can't remember everybody. It's a lot of people through 10 years coming through there. So it was good.
And that's that. Look, that was a very, very cool thing to be able to like you said, the reach. I mean, and when I got hired, when you hired me, and clearly maybe there was a lack of options, but I remember like thinking, okay, gosh, well, I have to, because I was in charge of the part of my job was helping to quarterback the new hire orientation, like scheduling and all that stuff, but then also like the American Heart Association stuff. It was a lot. I mean, you're constantly talking with people over and over, and you get to know these folks. And for a while, like I would know a handful by name, but then I'd meet them and they'd be like, "Hey man, hey, how are you?" I'm like, "I'm good. Why are you so excited to see me?" Like, "Oh, well, oh, okay, now I know your face." All right, gotcha.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people.
Yep.
And then you did hit on something that I wanted to make sure that we come back to here in a minute is so I have 5 questions rapid fire that we'll be asking all of our guests, and one of them is like biggest, most known mass casualty. So we'll come back to your 9/11 story. But
okay, that'd be good.
What'd you say a second ago?
I was going to say the other thing I was going to add. My current job in 2020, I left Air Methods, and I came over here to Minnesota to LifeLink. And so I've been here about 3.5 years living here in Minneapolis. So pretty nice. First thing people always say about Minnesota and Wisconsin is God is cold.
I was just going to ask how that polar vortex treat you. You know what I mean?
But you know what? In Colorado, I lived in Colorado for 8 years. San Diego before that. Colorado is cold. However, it's not cold. People don't know what cold is. Until you go up there, the Dakotas and the Montanas and Wisconsin and that kind of thing. And like right now, the temperature is in the 40s. It's been in somehow 50s, and one time the day was 60 one day because of that temperature thing. Usually around January or February, it's single digits, sometimes below 0. So this is like the spring. I don't even wear a coat.
It's balmy, right?
That's the kind of day it is, like not a coat day.
Yeah. Let me wear a coat. You sweatshirt, 30, 35 degrees in a sweatshirt. Perfect.
Nice.
Sweet. But single digits below 0 sometimes in January, February is brutal, but we haven't had it this winter. So
all right.
That's amazing. That's especially when you get, I guess, the lake effect and the humidity and all that goes with it, and that just the way it conducts the heat away from the body. That was always something I noticed more. You know what I mean? Is if you're in a mountainous area and it's not super humid, it's just so much easier to take single digit temperatures.
Yep.
But you know, 30 degrees when there's some humidity in the air, it can be rough, you know, at least for me. You know what I mean?
It's the ears and fingertips, man. That's the part that kills you.
Yeah, when my hands and feet get cold, that's when I want to quit. I can stand the rest of it, but when my hands and feet get cold,
So
I don't want to play no more.
Just for the record, your feet get cold.
Every now and again. Yeah.
Lucky you. There we go.
I hope you get scabies, and I mean that.
That's not nice. That is not nice. All right. So, Mr. Wolfe, I bet you remember this person. Somebody on TikTok just exclaimed our names, Alan and Charlie. That was Miss Nicole Furman.
She's legendary.
She is legendary. Nicole, if you're still there, you're still listening, why don't you let me know in the comment, and I'll invite you. And we'll let her say hi to Alan.
I love Nicole.
Here you go. Invite her. I just sent her an invite. Let's see if she's free to join. Okay, till she comes in and you guys start flirting. All right, so now Alan, you work at Lifelink 3. How has that transition been?
I moved here right after George Floyd in Minneapolis.
Gonna get political now. Okay, here we go.
What a day to come! What a time to come, huh?
Right.
Just a small amount of unrest. Yeah,
just a small amount.
A little bit.
Exactly. So I live downtown. It's been a great transition. They actually contacted me after George because I was accepted a job right the day before George Floyd was murdered. And then afterwards, they contacted me and said, "Are you still coming?" You know, just to make sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm sure the black thing had something to do with it.
Yeah. I
also,
mean,
you know, just
a fair question.
Yeah, and the unrest part of it. You know, like, you still coming here? You know, I go, yeah. Everybody's not like that. That's just, you know, some bad apples. And so, no regrets here. I've been here 3.5 years. Great team. You know, really, really good program, 12 bases in 2 states. Very supportive executive leadership to what I do here, and I appreciate it. I think I'm appreciated by the staff. And it's hard to come in like, you know, Charlie, coming into a new organization where you're the outsider. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But outsider who is very well known too. So that even has more kind of probably doubts and who the hell are you?
Right.
You want to do?
Well, hold on. I'm sure you have a tattoo somewhere that says Allen, MF, and Wolf. I'm sure you got it. Look at you. Look at you.
Speaking of what did Sam Jackson say in Pulp Fiction? All you had to say was you called the wolf, baby.
That's right. That's the soundbite we got to get, Alan.
That's absolutely.
Exactly, dude.
Now, hold on. Now, Greg, I'm probably not. You're probably not too old or too young or too old for whatever, whichever direction. Because what I'm trying to say is, if I hum a song, see if you can come up with it. I
got nothing, but I don't think it's because of age.
That's Airwolf.
Airwolf.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So guess what his ringtone was at one point.
Oh, was it really?
I don't know, but it should be.
Hey, if you had call signs on a chopper, that would have been just amazing. You know what I mean?
Well, isn't that your? Don't you have a
my email address?
There, that's it. It's Airwolf.
Airwolf. Yep, Airwolf 7.
That's solid. Nicole, are you there?
Hello.
Oh God. There she is.
How are you?
Legendary, Alan.
Yeah, he knows it. That's the bad part. He knows.
Oh.
Hello, Nicole. How are you?
You know I was in charge of all of you.
That part's true.
How are you guys?
We're great. We follow your life and get your kids go to those fancy colleges.
Yeah. Greg, this is Nicole. Nicole was our executive motivator, our executive planner, our executive
Executive
babysitter.
assistant was, title. Well,
Yeah. And so she basically worked, she helped Alan and the team of like 3 or 4 of us, depending on what time of the year it was. She kept us going in the right places and kept me out of trouble as much as possible. It was just a tough job.
Nice. I would imagine you doubled her workload if just knowing what I know. You know what I mean? It's great to meet you, Miss Nicole.
It was nice to meet you. I just wanted to say hello to you guys. You're doing well.
Thank you so much.
Good seeing you or talking to you.
Easy.
Well, I'll text you after this and catch up properly.
Okay.
Charlie, a
Later.
small. Oh, I'm so sorry. I jumped.
Go ahead, buddy.
too
What you
quick. I have the ADD thing where I just blurted out.
Girl?
From the technical standpoint, so I went live and put a little sign up that says go to Swear Engine's profile for audio, and if you were to add me as a guest, would the audio come through or no? It's just a question.
But we can try if you want to do that.
Well, no, we're still learning it, and I'm trying to get my audience to come over to your stuff. You know what I mean? Because it's a decent amount of people usually, and I'd love for more people to see this and get introduced to Mr. Wolfe for sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead and try.
Alan.
Yeah,
Maybe think you treat like I'm old.
You're not old. You're important.
That only took 14 and a half minutes.
No.
Let's see. I'm going to go over to your profile now.
All right, I'll be looking for it. All right, Mr. Wolfe, let's get into these questions before we get into some LVAD stuff, because you're definitely the LVAD guru, and talking with people out in the world. That's one of the things that, and some of the content that I built, it's one of the things that people ask about. I mean, some of the most is, what do we do in this case? What do we do in that case? And now there's all these new different, it's not even just LVADs anymore. There's a bunch of different device types of stuff. So I want to get into that too. So, but question number 1, what was your first call like? How did it influence you? Remember your first?
My very first call as a flight nurse was a pediatric infant who we flew to a state, I would say in the DC area. And it was a infant who was hypothermic, severely hypothermic.
Okay.
You're probably thinking, oh, that's kind of what's so special about that? Well, yes, it's the case. The mother, who was diabetic, her blood sugar had dropped, and she accidentally put the baby in the freezer.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Just in sort of a stupor from the hypoglycemia.
This is your first call?
First call.
Oh my God.
Accidentally put the baby in the freezer, wrapped it, put it in the freezer, and was sitting at home on the couch. The grandmother of the baby, came home, and shortly after that, and it said to her, realized she was confused and asked her where was the baby, and she couldn't remember, because her blood sugar was thrown off, So now she had, you got to call 911 for the, drink some juice kind of thing to get your blood sugar up. Wow. And she's running around looking for the baby, and she hears the crying, as she runs past the kitchen. She goes in the kitchen, opens the refrigerator, not there. She pulls the freezer, and the baby's sitting there in the freezer. So,
oh my God.
They grab the baby, run to the emergency room, and because it was a rural area and not equipped with pediatrics at the hospital, they called us. And that was my very first flight and I kept, when they give them report, the nurse says, yeah, the baby was in the freezer. You go,
what the hell, man?
You say the freezer, and and so you think about this hypothermia in general, and all of these things. You think hypothermia kind of set of what it looks like, but it's the mechanism. And when you hear about it, is always the part you go, Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
it's not like
wow,
sitting outside. That's somebody put you in the freezer and you couldn't get out. You know what I mean? But
that's not in a textbook.
No,
it's nowhere in a textbook.
No, that has never been written down.
Yep. Wow, dude. That's nuts. Okay, well, that tops mine.
Oh yeah, I got nothing. I got nothing for that.
I mean, I got some good ones, but good God Almighty! All right, that's nuts. All right, could you? So I'm gonna loop those. What about your toughest call, Alan? So I kind of have this like fishing, like the biggest fish, the most fish, the first fish. So what's your toughest call you ever had?
I would say my toughest call was we're flown for a scene flight in the rural areas outside of Washington, D.C. And it was a incident on a go-kart park,
Mhm.
go-kart, four
Right.
wheels. And we were flown because in that go-kart park, it was a female who had long hair with the helmets and they ride around the golf course. Anyway, her long hair had got caught in the
Oh,
back axle.
Oh
Yeah,
God.
caught in the back axle of the go-kart, and all of her hair, skin, everything was yanked off her head, and it was this it's wrapped around the axle. All of this, right here at the eyebrows, everything, skin, everything, which is pulled off her head. And so we got there. It was like Carrie the movie,
yeah.
where she's got the blood dripping on.
Right.
Yeah, but your
Oh
head, your scalp
wow.
is so vascular, so its blood is just pouring, and you couldn't even talk or the wind moving, touching those nerve endings on her head without
Oh,
her screaming.
good God.
The blood's pouring in her face, you're trying to like kind of hold pressure to stop the bleeding, and she's in so much pain. And so we had to intubate her prophylactically just for pain control. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah.
Giving her so much at the time, this is years ago, giving her so much at the time, we knew she had to be intubated just to control her pain,
Right.
all this stuff. And so the other tough part of that, what made it tough, is that they gave us, the fire department was smart enough to unravel the scalped piece, amputated part, because really amputation, took it
Right.
and put it in a bag and put it on ice and then
Smart.
gave it to us. And so just the hair, her skin, everything just snatched off, right?
Oh my
And
goodness.
I, what I think back now, I think that is probably was the catalyst for you go to go-kart park now, you see that it's a big covering over
Mm.
the axle.
Mm.
I'm sure that lawsuit probably
Oh, that the wolf fender.
Oh my God. Yeah.
no,
Wow, dude.
lawsuit probably did it.
Well,
So that
go
was
ahead.
probably the most amazing, crazy call and management that I probably had been involved.
That's correct. And you brought up something. So, sometimes in these conversations, like stealing a little bit of experience from you, you said something that I don't think a lot of people think about, at least if they've not been doing it a while. That sometimes you have to intubate people for reasons that aren't just like the 5 or 6 things,
Right,
that are on
right,
any textbook. One of them is pain. So you could, if we put that here on TikTok now, or if we did a TikTok that says sometimes you have to intubate people for pain, the comment section would lose their damn mind, right?
right,
Yeah.
But absolutely, there's times. That's the crazy thing about medicine. There are times where it's like, okay, well, this makes sense. I mean, if you've given her either so much that but she's still in pain and she's still awake, or you've given her stuff that could drop her blood pressure. Now you're flirting with that disaster. We still need to give her pain medicine, right? And I mean, can you give us a little bit of snapshot generally of what you'd maybe given, and maybe now, like, what anything you do different as far as like other pain meds that might be
yep,
available now versus then?
yep. We were like way out, like maybe 40 minutes outside from our accepting facility, and we knew that the meds we were giving her were, I won't say not touching her, but barely touching her. So we had to go with obviously more Versed, some Versed, and along with more fentanyl, which means that that was going to eventually affect her LOC and her respiratory drive,
Right.
and so she was just screaming in pain. So that gave us the um, thoughts. We got to control this pain,
Yeah.
on her, and the intubation was part of it. Had to be
Right.
intubation. Back in that time frame, docs are 100% in agreement with you because you knew once they got to the hospital, that's exactly what they're going to do. So
She's got to get
it
a
was
surgery. I mean, she's got to
exactly,
have
exactly,
procedure done.
exactly,
Right.
Right.
exactly. You knew that you weren't going to sit there in a ER screaming and screaming in pain without eventually getting intubated for something that severe. And very similar to if you had a partial amputation and you knew the course of therapy is going to be, they're going to be intubated, go to OR for this, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how we handle it back then. But drug choice, I mentioned Versed, I mentioned fentanyl. Nowadays, you probably could have got by with ketamine with this patient easily, easily.
Might have been a good one. Yeah.
Yep. Almost the perfect drug for her to kind of control her and keep her from being intubated to get her from point A to point B. So kind of ideal.
That's the drug that I'm learning about. I mean, daily now. I mean, like, I
Yeah.
don't necessarily give it daily, but like my first experience with it, I'll say it like this. It was a wreck, and this guy had a potentially punctured lung. And so we were going to do a chest tube. So we're like, well, why don't we give him, clearly going to give him some fentanyl. So we gave him some fentanyl. It's like, why don't we, we could also consider a bit of ketamine, but we don't want to try to hit polypharmacy at the same time. Like, I was influenced by somebody that said like, look, no, it is maybe just a tiny bit. And like, it'll be two different ways to give pain. And then we gave a minuscule amount and the dude quit breathing. So it's like,
Oh man.
here we go. Now we had to tube him anyway, but we were trying to avoid that. But like, it's a very interesting drug, and I don't want to get on a lecture of it, but I'm just trying to be humble to the fact that this has been the last 2 years I've learned so much medicine, because now I'm back doing it and on the flight line and working with some fantastic people and learning, and then of course going to teach and lecture. I mean, I can ask better questions of the people who are there, getting education either for me or that if we're getting education together, there's smarter conversations that are happening. I've learned so much. You also said earlier about learning from paramedics. I mean, I think I'll say this over and over. I think the nurse medic combo in air medical is the best option, especially for the U.S. And I learned so friggin' much from working with our nurses, like, because it's like, it's the same thing. Like if something comes up, like if it's an antibiotic or if it's something like, hey, give me the 10,000 foot view on this, and then they'll rattle it off. And so you're learning from them is unbelievable. If we weren't flying back in the day, and still today, I would go to the ER. I just don't work at the university location. I'm 2 hours north, but I used to go to the ER if we weren't flying, and I would just go, back when we had paper charts, and I would grab a couple charts, and they would let us as paramedics like do everything to help get the patient taken care of and DC'd, as long as the charge nurse signed off on it. That was all part of the policy, and we would go down there and help. And learning from those people were, unbelievable. Help me be whatever it is I feel like I am today.
Right.
Yeah.
I can remember too, you mentioned ketamine. I remember when I gave it the first time, a guy who had a fracture, and I said, hey, give it a little ketamine to take the edge off, kind of thing. And give him the ketamine, did the flight, did fine. And, toward the end of the flight, we're landing and going to the facility, and the guy says, I don't know what you gave me, but don't ever do that again.
Oh man, the devil.
I know. Because the whole time they have that K hole look in their face like this, like
the okay hole.
I know. He said, "Whatever you gave me, don't do that again."
Do that again. Copy that, sir.
It's it's a really interesting drug. The pharmacology of it blows my mind. The only thing, like, I like seeing it in use. The only thing that bothers me is, and you get this feel from your comments section, is how freely it's administered, especially at the street level now. And that's terrifying to me, because, if you even a rudimentary understanding of ketamine will tell you that it's nothing to play with. It's great for its intended purpose, but it's not something you just sling. You know what I mean? And, we're seeing the detrimental effects, of that with several things. We see it in the news and stuff, and of course case review. And I'm just worried that people are going to get it snatched because they're not respecting it appropriately. And it's a great option, like you were talking about. I can remember back in the day when intubation was your go-to, when people were severely burned, and pain control was just something that was almost unobtainable,
Right.
And what did you do? You intubated them. You know what I mean? And I don't want to go back there if we don't have to. You know what I mean? So I wish people respected it a little more. And
yeah, the whole pharmacodynamics of the whole thing is just unbelievably incredible. I mean, it basically is it acts like a benzo, with the exception it has that very cool effect where it causes that endogenous catecholamines, epi, all that crap to be released, which is why we typically don't see it change blood pressure much, unless you go to get that one patient that's been extremis for an hour or more.
Right. Right.
And then like you wonder why their blood pressure drops. But it's one of the things that's you have to know the dangers and you have to know the benefits.
Yep. And I think it would be really, really great if people, I don't know how you would say this, if pharmacology was taught at the entry paramedic level and more receptor focused, where you say, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's an NMDA receptor. Here's what we're doing with ketamine versus, teaching it by purpose, right? That's something I've kind of always vehemently been against when I hear somebody say, well, atropine is an antidysrhythmic. It is not. It is an anticholinergic, right? We get the benefits of it being an antidysrhythmic by acting on certain pathways. I think if at the initial education level, because this is not something flight crews have a problem with, right? They understand it. But if at the initial education level, we learned it more along those lines, I think we would see more people, using this medicine much more safely. But that's just my 2 pennies. It's just what I see. I just wish people gave it a greater amount of respect so that we could keep it around. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Especially considering that case in Aurora, Colorado.
Right. Elijah McClain.
Yeah.
That was huge. That was, so many things went wrong there that it's just appalling that it even happened. It was like every fail-safe was broken.
Right.
But, from the paramedic standpoint, right, from the healthcare practitioner standpoint, I have to look at that and say, despite everything else, if that medicine had been treated with a greater amount of respect, it would not have automatically been reached for with no assessment, with, even if you can't weed everything else out of that scenario, and there was plenty wrong with it, but even if you couldn't get rid of all that, you wouldn't see them just RSI somebody for that reason. Right. So in that same vein, if we treated ketamine with the same respect that we did RSI, Elijah McClain would be alive. Right. So we obviously we can't go back in time, but we don't want any more of that. Right. Because we all got into this with the understanding of first you do no harm,
Right.
And I feel like they failed that young man.
Yes. Elliot on TikTok says, definite failure to assess.
There was a million things that went wrong there you could get into it and discuss it all day, and it should be discussed. That should be something people write papers on when they're going through medic school and stuff like that. If you're going to be out there in the street and have these medicines at your disposal, you should have to think through that case long and hard before you have access to a narc box that has this type of medication in it, because it is a perfect example of what can go wrong. I just, in my opinion, Elijah McClain is to paramedicine as George Floyd was to police work, right? Yep. So that becomes the quintessential case of you've got to think. Yep.
I think in the nursing one would be that case at Vanderbilt with that nurse.
I never got clear or definitive information on everything that was wrong vis-a-vis the Pyxis and the override and all that kind of stuff. But, at the end of the day, right, 5 rights. The 5 rights are a fail-safe if we actually use them.
Correct. Right. Correct. I agree.
I get that vecuronium and Versed start with a V, but in this particular case, I haven't seen an actual vial of name brand Versed, and I couldn't tell you when. So in this particular case, it should have been midazolam, versus vecuronium. And especially when you're tired, when you're overworked, that's when and I'm not trying to sound like it couldn't have happened to me, because I think the reason I don't make many mistakes is because I assume everything can happen to me. That's why I double check and triple check myself. But in this particular case, if you stop and say, I'm tired, I'm overworked, I've got multiple shifts under my belt here, am I analyzing this the right way? Am I looking at this the right way? When you are 30 hours deep in a 36 and you're calculating pediatric amiodarone, you remember to do that, but it's the routine stuff that gets us, right? It's the routine stuff, the medical mistakes that hurt people, and anyway, I'll get off that soapbox, but I just, for anybody listening, I hope they're paying that kind of attention, because we all want to learn super cool stuff and do crazy procedures and critical care and thoracostomy, and we pay attention there, but That's not what's killing people. It's the tasks that either are routine or the ones that we perceive as routine. That kind of goes back to Elijah McClain. It was perceived as routine. It was a safe sedative, right? That's what everybody's been saying. Ketamine is safe. Well, no, nothing is all the way safe.
Right. Man,
You know what I mean?
Preach that.
Yeah. That's just, as an educator, I
You
feel
started
obligated.
to get into the point where I thought Allen Wolfe was going to start banging on the desk. I want it the same.
Exactly. You're right, man. You nailed it,
Standardization and
Greg.
data man.
Yeah, you nailed it. Hey, I'm gonna close my door. It's like,
Sure.
I can hear you still.
You don't have Greg, you don't have a echo, do you?
I don't know. I turned off my mic on the live because I think yours is piping the audio back through. And I think that was the issue the other day. So that would make it definitely my fault. So Charlie 1, Greg 0. But
I don't think we're fighting. Alan,
What kind of operation is this?
amateur.
we are winging it. This is 100%.
Alan, you got something in your beard, buddy. Let's knock that off if you're going to be throwing shade.
We're winging it for sure. Yeah. We're not flight medics, but we are winging it.
That's true. Hold on. I got that.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Wolfe. Now this is the good one, or this is the one that I would love other people to hear. What is the biggest mass casualty you've ever worked? And can you give us a little bit of what you saw and learned?
When you said mass casualty, the first thing I thought, I have three. Like your career, you have three something that happens that you never forget. And one of them was the DC sniper, when that was a big serial killer thing when I was at DC.
I didn't know that.
Some of those.
Wow.
Yeah, some of those patients that we got there. The second was when I worked in DC, we had a crash of our own helicopter across the street from the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
I was one of the helicopters that was one of the first ones to respond to our own crash. Whole different thing. That one is not a big one, but obviously the biggest one would be September 11th, when the plane hit the Pentagon.
Because you were on shift that day, right?
Yeah, I was actually off. I was the chief flight nurse, and I was off at my house, and I lived in Arlington, Virginia. The Pentagon is in Arlington, Virginia, right on the Potomac. And I was talking on my deck to a buddy of mine who lived in New York about, oh my God, this watching the news or what's happening there. And he was like, it's crazy here. We're not sure what's going on. And so as we're talking, I'm standing on my deck, talking to him on the phone and looking at the TV, my second floor off the kitchen. And while we're talking, we can hear playing getting louder and louder and louder.
Oh, God.
And before you know it, it was a massive plane flying over the house, not very high off the ground, pretty low, pretty fast over the house. And I actually initially thought it was going to hit the house because it was getting so loud, So I actually kind of got down on the deck thinking it might have hit the house because it was just so loud. But when I looked up, I could see the windows of the aircraft as it came by. I could see the faces of those people in the window.
Oh my God.
They roll by. Yep. And it rolls right over, the house. And remember, I lived on a golf course, not the nice, pretty side of the golf course.
There's a bad side.
It's a bad side. The bad side where it's the driving range where the balls come over the field.
Okay.
Wow. That must have been so surreal.
I mean, it was crazy because when it flew over the house and then it went over the golf course, I saw black smoke. And I was thinking, I was thinking, did that thing just crashed? Why did the plane hit the height? I didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? The whole topic of the day was planes.
Right.
So, I didn't know whether should I pick up the phone and dial 911 and say a plane almost hit the house or a plane flew pretty low over. What do you do when you call 911 and say almost?
How do you explain that? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I wasn't sure what the black smoke was. That could have been the plane. It could have been, I know what it was.
Right.
I knew over where I was looking was also Ronald Reagan National Airport. So it could have been the airport. I had no idea what was happening. And then all of a sudden on the news, it switched to a plane that hit the Pentagon. So
God.
I said, oh my God. First thing I thought, I got to go to work because I knew I worked at the largest hospital in the DC, that all the patients was going to come to MedStar, which is the resuscitation unit.
Right.
So I just grabbed my bag, had on a tank top and some sweats, and jumped on my bike,
Looking good.
My Aprilia Italian scooter. I had it.
I bet you had that thing in the wind, didn't you?
That's hot.
Yeah.
Hitting it. And then first thing I did is headed toward the Pentagon, because I wanted to see what was going on. And when I got down there, you could see the black bellowing smoke.
Wow.
And there was papers in it, still in it, floating down from the thing. And it was the cops trying to block me from getting any closer. A cop was in the middle of the street, blocking me on the street from going any closer. And he was trying to motion people to get away from another building that was near there. It's called the Navy Annex. It's set on a hill up from the Pentagon. Now they knocked it down. It's the Air Force Memorial now. But that building sat there, and you saw women coming out there, taking those high heels off and booking it to their cars. The scary thing was people trying to get out of the city. People are driving down the opposite way of the highway to get out the city.
Wow, panic.
Wow, dude.
Yeah, you got 4 lanes going out. You got 3, 4 lanes going in, and some people were getting on the lane getting in to get the hell out because the other one maybe not going fast enough for them, which is kind of scary.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's scary.
And so got down there and then saw that stuff, and then I decided to ride by the White House. I don't know why. I don't know why I had to go out there, because the guy won't let me go around. So I went around the White House.
That kind of stuff gets you on the list, Alan. That'll get you on a list,
I know, dude. When I got in DC, though, and this is before cell phones or text messaging, all that stuff, there were people, the stoplight still working, people were in traffic, and I could see one person with their map open in the car next to me, looking to see where they're going to go today.
You're going to have to tell those of our listeners who have tight skin and judgment what the hell a map is.
I remember finding calls with maps.
It wasn't Google Maps.
Right.
And so when I went by the White House, by that time, the Secret Service had put on all their ninja stuff.
Oh, wow.
With the eyes out. The guns that are like Ghostbusters, that big.
Wow. I can't imagine.
And they were extending the White House grounds and telling people to get off that park there and people to get away from the White House. And they were just a lot of them just coming out the guns, just cordon off the White House. It was kind of scary.
Wow.
And so I made my way to the city. You saw F-15 jets fly over real rapidly. I mean, just so low, and they were just jetting by the city. And I could see that one of our aircraft flew right over me in the Adams Morgan area of DC, and just flew right toward the Pentagon. So when I rolled in the door, I rode in a hospital center, Washington Hospital Center. I get there, I park my Aprilia scooter outside, Which was the smartest thing I ever did.
Did you take out the AA battery that powered it and take it inside with you?
That's terrible,
dude. Exactly. And so it was the smartest thing ever, because I could ride on the sidewalk. Nobody cared.
Yeah,
it was great. That's how I got there. And so when I got there were 2 patients sitting there already. 2 patients
wow.
had beat me there, and I basically saw the thing almost,
Wow.
And that was people that got in private cars and was taken there, and they had burns on them. And so through that day, that next several hours, we got a total of 9 patients, and everybody was burned. Everybody was burned. You didn't hear anything about femur fractures, pelvic fractures, pneumo, sucking chest wounds, none of that stuff. It was severely injured burn patients and inhalation injuries from that gasoline. But I'll leave you with this last story I tell, because I know we got a different topic, is when the aircraft landed on the pad, and we went out to unload. And it was the U.S. Park Police helicopter. They flew at 412. Yep. And so it's that high offload. You got to put them here, then you put them down to the stretcher.
Right.
And we go out there to unload. They had brought up patients from the Pentagon. We opened the door, and this one lady, she was laying face down on a board. She was totally naked. She had nothing but skin just hanging off of her. And she was covered in black soot. It was all over.
Oh my God.
I could tell that she was a black lady, had black soot over. And then what I saw is she had no straps, and she was a pretty healthy lady. And I thought, oh my God, please God, don't let us drop her on this helipad, trying to get her to the stretcher, because behind us was Fox News, MSNBC, CNN had cameras zooming in already. They had propped out there watching helicopters unload. And so we're able to get her down safely with three of us to get her to the stretcher. The first thing I saw, I noticed that she had nothing but the collar of her blouse on, and it was still buttoned. Everything else was burnt off.
Wow.
She had gold earrings in, and I just yelled to her, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Because it's the rotor stuff, and she kind of nodded her head because she was face down. She was face down on the wood board. And so we rushed her inside, and she reeked of jet fuel, which goes back to nowadays, and even back then, when in disaster management and decon, these days, you should never put that patient in there, but I'm sure they didn't even think that. I mean, you weren't even thinking that back then when they brought a patient and they put him in, and you lift off and you go, oh my God, she smells like gasoline. I'm sure they You know what I mean?
What would you do now? I mean, if I walk, do we just sit out here for a little while and hose her off?
Open the window,
figure something out. But
yeah,
I mean,
you can't like turn around. I guess I don't know what you do. Maybe you turn around. I don't know. But she reeked of jet fuel, and so we got her in and that kind of thing. So it was a long day, interesting day. Man. We didn't get as many patients as we thought. Within an hour and 2 hours, it was all over by 10:45 because so many people were killed, not a lot of people injured. No. We got all of those sick ones. So
and you told me, I remember you told that there's a bunch of hand burns.
Yes,
you remember explaining that?
Right, and there was a lot of people. If you notice, there you can see pictures, but mostly everyone came in. They had burns to their hands. And if you think about a building, it's explosion in your building. Just say even this one. This is a 15-story building. And if I had to get out and I can't see, how do you get out? You use your hand, And so a lot of people had a lot of burns to their hands. Some people lost their fingers, 2 of them I remember lost their whole fingers from severe burns. And so it complicated things to getting out. How do you touch something that's hot, to get out of there? And you just basically going toward the light to get yourself out of there. So I'm sure it was even worse in New York, with all that stuff, so crazy.
That's so just amazing to hear that. We had years ago when I first got an EMS, we had her name was Flo. I don't think she'll mind me mentioning her name. She was an on-site New York City paramedic on 9/11, and she had made her way down to where we live afterward. She had some respiratory issues and stuff, obviously from the dust. And I would listen to her stories for as long as she would tell them. You know what I mean? I just wanted to hear it. And people would pull me to the side, sometimes, and they would say, why do you find that so interesting? Like you went to war, and I guess from their point of view, I get it, the way they were looking at it. But the thing is, when you go to war, you're 100% prepared, and then you get to leave it behind. I couldn't imagine the story you're telling, and I'm just trying to give it appropriate reverence, that you were on your balcony, you were at home. Right. You know what I mean? And watch this happen and just see that, and then be at, not to make a bad pun, I'm not trying to, but be at ground zero for it. I couldn't imagine what that must have been like. It must have been incredible. You know what I mean?
You know what it was? These days you hear a lot about mental health, or you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. Back then that wasn't a thing. You know what I mean? You just kind of like, okay. Yeah. I think it was tougher for me when I had to respond to our own crash and try to take care of people who I was their boss, and they were my friends laying on the ground and a patient,
Do you think it was the personal connection that made you feel that way?
Right. Exactly. That was tougher for that one than it was for the Pentagon thing. Because the Pentagon thing, like, I just kind of, not to be flippant, but I didn't really know them. You didn't know the people.
No, it doesn't sound flippant at all. I was an infantry medic. I get that 100%. It's a lot harder to not get emotionally involved when you know the names of a person's children.
Right,
You know,
right, dude. Right,
that's a
right,
lot harder when you
right.
saw them this morning and they were fine. That it is
Exactly.
very difficult to disconnect from
Yes.
that. And you have to, right? Because I teach my students, no patient has ever benefited from your emotions.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't matter if it's your anxiety, your worry, your hatred, your dislike, your prejudices. No patient has ever benefited from it. So it's problem and solution.
Right.
And I get that 100%. So no, I don't think you sounded flippant at all. It makes it tough. That's why we, everywhere you go, there's laws against us working on our family members if there's any other option, because
Right.
you will not always make a good decision.
Right.
You know what I mean? You
Right.
inject that emotion into it and you start overthinking, over medicating, over diagnosing. Doctors aren't even supposed to treat their own children's ear infections. And I think there's a good reason for that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Alan, you remember, well, I mean, Greg, Alan and Marge were buddies.
Okay.
You
I
know,
love her.
right.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
a good egg, man. I definitely like
Mhm.
Marge. Yeah.
Yep. Well, so I was working in Oklahoma and we were maybe 2 years, I was 2 years, had left, it was like maybe 2012. And I go in one night and one of my close buddies there in the ER doc, he and I became pretty close buddies. And so this call came in and it was right after Thanksgiving. And, Marge's family lives there. And so we had, of course, Thanksgiving there and met several of our aunts and uncles and that kind of thing. And anyway, I'm back at work. I'm working nights, and this call comes in for a cardiac arrest. And I walked down the hall and I told Dr. Heron, I was like, Heron, it's my airway. And he's like, all right, man, but you got to use a glide scope. It's like, use a glide. Fine. So I get back there and this call comes and Heron's awesome, keeps everybody calm. We get the guy intubated. We go through all the steps, all the stuff through the kitchen sink, essentially. And at some point, of course, it says, all right, um, anybody have anything else? And of course we said no. And then we called it and I'm cleaning up the room. And then I noticed that the shoes looked unique and familiar. And then I looked up and down the body and I was like, oh, shut up. Shut up. And I walked up to the desk and I was like, to the clerk, and I was like, just do me a favor. Tell me the name doesn't say blank. And they're like, yeah, exactly. I'm like, God. So, and I get a little emotional when I think about it. I walked out, I called Marge and I was like, sweetie, we got to call your mom and dad. Your uncle just died. And it was one of the guys that was, at the actual Thanksgiving. I mean, he lived right around the corner. And
Wow.
It's one of those things that luckily I didn't know because that would have,
Right.
it just, but even after it's like, yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to know that. And, getting emotional, just going back, thinking of it was nuts.
Right.
But anyway,
That's one of the reasons that I worked 911 in a county that I lived in when I was a child, but it's not the actual county that I grew up in. I learned that lesson the hard way in the Army, that I didn't want to work on people that I knew really well. You know what I mean? And I can remember being an FTO. I'll never forget this until the day I die. I'll be in the throes of dementia. I'll remember this. We had a student. She was writing her first clinical. She was going to become an EMT. She had aspirations of becoming a doctor. She was doing undergrad in biology, all that good stuff. It's her very first clinical shift. The very first call we get toned out to is a fall. And she immediately recognized the address, and it was her grandmother who had died. She went to sudden cardiac arrest on this kid's first call. And of course, she didn't complete the program after that. And I can't say that I blame her. I remember, like, be okay. So I'm the cardiology guy. That's what people say, right? Because I do these classes
they say it in that exact tone too, by the way.
right. Yeah, that's how they say it. If it were written down, it would be with the capitals and the lowercase letters like they do. But I can remember looking at my dad, who was having an inferior STEMI, plain as day, when he was 46 years old, asking me if he should take the T in case because they needed informed consent because of the chance of hemorrhage, and just drawing a complete blank because he was my father. Like I had helped people make this decision, but it was that much harder in that moment. Now years later, my dad would develop SVT, and of course we live in the middle of nowhere, so I actually had to be the one to push the adenosine on him, and that's a game changer. Adenosine makes you nervous anyway.
Right.
But to watch your own father flatline by your hand changes things. So when people tell me stories like Alan's saying, I completely and utterly get it. So for anybody in the audience that doesn't understand, he was not being flippant. It's not the same when you know someone. And honestly, the ability to disconnect makes it better. And a lot of people will seek out medical care from the people that they know best or people that they grew up with. And, just as a caveat or something everybody should know, that is not always the best option.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better to be a perfect stranger when you want objective, diagnoses and data,
Well, I mean, those are good. Those are incredible points and viewpoints. Now let's get a little bit more humor into this.
I was gonna say, yeah, this got depressing.
This was Elliot says he says if you think you have great EMS stories compared to Allen Wolfe, you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are right.
Amazing.
Nobody's gonna top that.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Yep. All right, Alan, before I'm sure you have a busy day, so give us the top 3 things we need to know about LVADs. First off, everybody needs to be aware that Alan not only wrote the book on writing the book, but he also wrote the chapter in the book on LVADs and how to use them. So just to make sure that we're all what that means, Alan, the big Air Medical Bible was Holleran's Principles and Practice. And now, since she has passed the torch, it is now Holleran, Wolfe, and Frakes. And now it's
Wolfe,
Frakes,
yeah.
And
Danny. Yeah.
Yeah. And Danny. Yeah. And Naaman. So and I was trying to tell Craig this earlier, and I was like, well, and I got tripped up on my words because I said, well, I mean, it used to be that now it's this, and so now there's 3 new folks, and it's Wolfe, Frakes, and Naaman. That's
right.
That's the new one.
Yep.
So in that chapter on LVADs, Alan, what do you know about LVADs and how'd you get that started?
That the experience came in 1998 when the hospital in DC had 2 patients that had a device that had it for a year. And they had the big console that they would push around the hospital because they were trapped there. They couldn't leave. And all of a sudden the technology changed and became smaller. And they put the patients, decided, when did the technology change? And it wasn't, I'm not sure if it's FDA approved to put people in the field. The hospital decided they need to go because they had been there a year. Their wives had basically moved in the room, and so what they did is they trained the flight crew. They said that something happens, train the flight crew to figure it out and get them. And so they discharged them, and then they start to train us as super users.
Wow.
And so they gave us all this information. It was tough initially because it's just trying to get the concept of how it works compared to what in the hospital. And some people didn't have that CVIC experience I had. And I was chief flight nurse at the time. And so they put the 2 patients out there, and we just waited for them to need us, and they basically didn't need us for a long periods of time. And so during that time frame, I came up with a color coding system because in DC we were putting in the VAD division, or heart failure division, was putting in so many devices in people and discharging them, and people didn't know that people were walking the street with a device that makes them pulseless, can have lethal rhythms and still function, and makes their pulse oximetry inaccurate. What I mean? They're just walking the street, And so we had other hospitals, I think 5 or 6 in the Baltimore and Virginia area, that put in those devices. So they were just turning them out. So I got together with a team of people, and decided a team of people, meaning from each hospital, just one from each hospital, the VAC coordinators, and develop a color coding thing. I said, you know what? If you can just color code them, I'll be able to figure it out. And what I did, I came up with a color coding system. If this is the HeartMate 2 device, is orange. If it's a HeartMate 3, which is the one you guys see most often now, I think that one is green. And so everything had a color, meaning that the VAC coordinators, only thing they had to do is put a color tag on a device. So when EMS came up to it, they can go to this guide. Now it's an app. You look at it, and it gives you 10 things you need to know, and then all the emergency operation stuff of it. And I came up with that back in in 2000 was an idea concept.
That's
It
so
was
cool.
adopted by Thoratec. Thoratec was the company that adopted. Thoratec now is owned by Abbott. So
Hmm.
Abbott owns them now. They've been a couple of owners. And so they adopted as a best practice. And then boom, things exploded on my end because then now you had somebody who was pre-hospital that was this VAD expert that had not solved, but helped to create a way to manage patients for pre-hospital. The state of California adopted the whole thing, which is
That's awesome.
humongous.
Wow.
That's like a country.
Yeah.
And then Southern Florida, the big county there, Broward, whatever the big county there in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of other states, Maine, and a lot of states start to adopt the color coding system. And now it's an app, rather than a PDF, it's an app that people can download and it does it. So
What's the name of the app?
the introduction to it. And the three things I would say about that, I kind of named it. One is that patients are pulseless. There's no such thing as a PEA in a VAD patient. It's just not. Second thing I would say is that using a blood pressure cuff is kind of inaccurate. The best way to assess these patients is with a Doppler, to do a blood pressure by Doppler. And then the third thing I would add, as you say, important, I would say pulse oximetry is inaccurate. So you would go back to those skills, Greg, you were saying that medics taught me, how do you look at a patient with all of this fancy stuff and you see that they're hypoxic, and because we didn't have pulse oximetry. I mean, pulse oximetry is inaccurate. So those would be the three things I would name off the bat.
Very cool. Yeah, and then what's the name of the app?
Let me look at it right here, dude. Let me see here. I think it's
for our street medics, especially, because they don't have the Dopplers and the things we have to go back to those old school things that Alan was alluding to, right? Where, what's your best gauge of cerebral perfusion, mental status? That's what it is. You know what I mean? When you're in that situation. And I remember, the days before pulse oximetry when, and I know it ended up being untrue but you would check the pulses in the various places to try to determine, blood pressure and perfusion and things like that, and your cap refill was absolutely important, somewhere besides pediatrics and all that. And I hate that we're getting away from that. I embrace the technology. I love it. I think we should know how to use it. The ultrasounds, the butterfly may be my favorite invention ever in terms of point of care information and the interventions that you can ascertain need to be done with that information. But we have to make sure, what I tell my students is I don't care how many calculators you have, you need to be able to do long division. You need to remember how to do that because the time comes where you need it. And this is a great example where technology has made some of our other technology, at least in that situation, somewhat obsolete. So we have to keep some of that old school assessment technique because you can always fall back on it. The batteries never die on that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And you mentioned that medics usually trucks don't have the Doppler. If you don't have a Doppler, you can use the non-invasive. Just tell when you call the hospital to say, I'm using the map, and they say, I got that map from a non-invasive monitor. And then they'll be able to say, okay, it's not as accurate, but is what I can work with. And so that's the thing to communicate. So nothing wrong with the non-invasive, but just make sure you communicate. That's where you get your information from. A Doppler just happens to be more accurate,
Now, your target mean arterial pressures in those patients, do they change or vary after the body's had time to adjust to this or no?
Every all of them are around the same, about 70 to 80 is a good number of map. Anything lower, like within 65 to 70, sometimes okay, but 70 is kind of ideal, about 70 to 80. This is the app here. It says My LVAD.
Okay.
My LVAD, everybody.
I'm downloading that myself. So
yep, and I don't get any money from that at all. I don't even own it. It's just my stuff.
I mean,
it's so
a big
cool.
baller. Just walk into the room, man. Your ego's been there 8 minutes.
You're Pasteur, man. You gave it to the world. You know what I mean?
Right. So they have a EMS site. Oh, it says under construction. Well, that's interesting. You hit EMS and it says under construction. I guess they uploaded something. I have no idea, but that is the site they use. Is EMS there?
Yeah, very cool.
And he goes, yep. And that's the links.
Sweet.
So
we'll look it up.
Yeah, the
Oh yeah,
opportunity.
I'm going to go through this myself actually, because this is I'm out of practice doing what I do now. So when I hop on an ambulance, it's you know what I mean? You got to keep your edge sharp, and a certain amount of that's running calls, and a certain amount of that is you just got to seek out training,
Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Alan, we were talking about Omni earlier, and I remember. So when Alan hired me, we would have to go like early on because the Air Methods was still buying up companies, and that was some of our first. I think it was my first trip. I don't want to say the name of the company, but we went to Florida, and and Alan's like, okay, we need to go make sure these people know what they're talking about.
Nice.
About to be under our wing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to be real simple. We're going to make sure they can do airway. We're going to make sure they can do breathing. We're going to make sure they do circulation. So we set it up and we bring these guys in and we basically just run them through a very simple scenario and basically shaking out the hiders, the ones that can't do it. Um, but that was like the thing, like because I was already I'd fallen in love with education, a decade before, but like all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is kind of a fun game. Now we're
Yeah.
finding people who don't want to be challenged. And then, but there's a whole psychology to that, Alan. I mean, like, do you have like a memory of like that one person that like pushed you a little too hard, or maybe something you learned from relative to like, the people who hide or don't want to do any extra education?
Yeah, I can remember once saying to um uh, my team, this is in DC, when I was chief flight nurse. I had said, hey, this is when the FPC and CFRN were optional. I said, hey, I think we should all take the CFRN and FPC, get a review course here, then everybody takes it. And I can remember people saying to me, to my face, when I take that exam, I'll be up out of here. That's what
Wow.
somebody said to me. I'm not taking that. Well, the next year, of course, Kane comes out and says it's mandatory.
Never say
I
never.
know, I know. Now you're
Do it.
forced to get it, and you're forced to get it, or you lose your job, kind of thing, And so, it was that kind of stuff. People, you hear people say, like, "Man, some of the stuff you can just do." You knew it was coming. You had your mind like, "That's a good thing that everybody should have that,"
Right.
and um, those kind of things kind of sparked me with education and endeavors. And then that same thought is that when we would do competency for equipment, you would, as you mentioned, hider, you would always know that somebody who had the nice personality, had been there a while, or new or pretty or whatever, who could kind of talk their way out of it or stand in the back and not participate. And so the best way I found to do that was everybody would do demonstrations. So if there was the LTV 1200, if I would say to Charlie, okay, you got a patient that is an overdose, 26-year-old, blah, 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 blah. You need to set them on initial vent settings, just what they were on prior to intubation. Boom, set them up on use the vent, and Charlie would go in and put it in. And then you can tell from demonstration who knows something and who doesn't know something by demonstrating this particular skill. If
Right.
people don't know it, great. You don't know it. It's not like a got you moment. Is that okay? I can pull Charlie aside if he didn't do the objectives or what I expected, and then boom, give him that training to get him up to par right to the spot. Like, let's go over it. Let's go over this vent. Make sure you got it, and he can practice a little, and then come back and give him another scenario. Okay, Charlie, I got a 12-year-old with a DKA. We had to intubate just now, and we need to put on vent settings. Sort of the same kind of diagnosis for ventilation, and then see how he reacts then. And then he nails it, he gets it, and then you validate competency. And so, I think that's the easiest way, the best way, because it's non-threatening. You're kind of helping the people who are trying to hide in the back, and
Mhm.
so I would say that should be a gold standard. You know what?
Yeah, that's what. Go ahead.
Make it a gold standard.
The same.
I want it
I want
the
the damn
same.
same. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to rope people in sometimes. They will squander a good training opportunity because they're afraid of looking inadequate or something like that, So it's good that you do that. You know what I mean?
Just demonstrate it. You don't know it, just say,
Yeah.
I don't even know it. You know, they said, Charlie, there's the Hamilton. I am not an expert on that at all. You know, that thing comes out with the different names, all that stuff.
Don't get me started.
Why did you change the names of the you know, it's just a struggle. So I get people who don't get it, you know, because I sat in that seat myself.
Yep. Well,
that's
the fun part of the game is like, you know, like, oh, this person's hiding, but how do you get them to be, you know, more confident, you know, and that was, I always enjoyed that. And then Air Methods quit buying people, and here we are. All right, Mr. Wolfe, I'm sure you have other stuff to do today. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or chat about?
No, man, this has been exciting. Only done this podcast thing twice, you know, that's a young people thing, you know.
Yes.
You're not young. You look young. How old are you? Like 35?
My skin is pretty, you know, no wrinkles, too many wrinkles. You know, I listen to podcasts all the time on YouTube. I just haven't got into it on TikTok or anything yet. So,
well, we have a site on YouTube. We'll have Greg and I'm sure going to talk. That's what we were talking about. Whose account are we going to use to go on TikTok? But we do like having people here to ask questions. By the way, if anybody wants to ask a question, holler it out, and we'll ask the Wolf right before he heads out. But the we will have all that. This is kind of building up a couple back episodes. First, like maybe 5 to 10 is what I wanted, so that we could kind of start dripping it and figuring out, like, you know, the right way, the wrong way. But I knew when I called you, like, we have all this equipment relatively dialed in. I didn't want to give you a half-ass.
Yeah.
Effort.
Yeah. No, not with stories like that, man. You've got some serious history and experience, man. So yeah, just massive respect on this side of the table for sure.
Hey, dude, Greg, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Mr. Allen Wolfe, I appreciate it. As always, you're the man.
Always watching, always judging.
I love it.
That's right. I'm probably going to put that as a audio here. So anytime somebody says something, like, always, I'm going to get you to send me an audio, Alan.
Always watching, always Jay. Anytime somebody says something wrong, that's what we'll do.
Always judging. I'm actually absolutely going to do that. All right.
Exactly.
That's funny.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Greg, you want to send us out?
Yeah. Hey, so thanks so much for being here, Alan. This was incredible. Everybody who's watching, thanks for watching. Anybody who watches this after the fact, thank you so much for logging on and trying to improve your knowledge base in your craft. And when you're done with that, get out there and practice.
Take care, everybody.
All right, guys. Thanks.